Afternoon, everyone. I'll do my best to keep you awake after lunch. All right. What I want to talk about this afternoon for the next 25 minutes is one pillar of Google Cloud's serverless stack, which is Cloud Run. And as I said, it's one of many. And first, we're going to just run through a brief introduction, just basically the whys of Google Cloud, and then we'll get into the whats. So look, you've already been through a bunch of serverless sessions, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide or the next few slides. We all know why serverless is important and the problems that we have, and this is a little bit of our perspective on this from a survey. And delivery speed obviously is the big goal. Cost savings are a big goal, and all that sort of stuff, and particularly lack of expertise. So the faster you can get and easier you can get information, your things deployed and have them running, the happier everybody is. And so we think serverless at Google is a little bit different. It's more than just a function. We've developed the single serverless platform that allows you to deploy virtually anything in a structured way that is open source, that's portable, that you can just define and run. And it's all built on open technologies, so there's a big case to be made for hyperscalers and open source, and lots of discussions we can have about that in the break. But we're very much believers in the ability of choice and avoiding vendor lock-in. So we try and do as much open source as we can, where we can, and we want these serverless workloads to be portable and interoperable and things like that. And so that is why Cloud Run particularly focuses on the concept on containers, right? But without, this is going to sound very weird, but it's containers without Docker files, and we'll get to that shortly. And so you kind of get to pick your own adventure. So the orange part there is the part that we look after, and so we'll dive a bit into some of this as we go along. But we take care of all of the provisioning and security and upgrades and all of that. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the concept of shared fates and where you come on in that continuum about how much you're responsible for and how much your cloud hyperscaler is responsible for. And so we take care of all of that stuff. And then you just have to worry about the bits in blue. Around policy and compliance, performance monitoring, and of course the application development itself. Now, even that is starting, those blue boxes are already starting to change colour somewhat. So they're starting to take on that little hue, that little shade of yellow. So maybe they're going a little bit green. And so particularly if you have stopped by the booth already that we have out in the other room, or if you do want to stop by in the break, we've got an interesting demo running up of a thing called Application Canvas, which is a good example of application development changing colour, where you just basically drag and drop the components that you want in terms of the serverless operations, and then we'll deploy them for you. And then of course, because we're in the age of large language models, you can just type what you want, and then we'll deploy them for you as well, which is kind of crazy. And then of course, now with things like Duet for code completion or Copilot, again, the application development is being taken away from you somewhat as well. So that also impacts that change of color. So and so you can run your Cloud Run workloads wherever you wish, and you can see, if you're not aware, that there is a little circle over Auckland in the lower right hand corner. That's because there's a Google Cloud region coming to Auckland. Don't ask me when, I can't tell you. It's not that I won't, it's that I can't, I actually don't know, but we have announced it. And this also gives me the opportunity to talk about one of our first new features that we released a few weeks ago at Cloud Next, to do with Cloud Run and serverless. And so one of the new features we just announced is the ability to deploy Cloud Run into multiple regions globally behind a single IP address. So, so when you're deploying, if you're using the command line, you just comma separate every single region where you want your Cloud Run instance to deploy, and we'll deploy to each of those instances, and it's all backed by a single IP. So the DNS just takes care of itself, and we'll route the requests to where they need to go. So that's kind of fun. So you know, we feel that there's lots of benefits to using Cloud Run. We'll get onto the technical stuff shortly. We'll talk about the high reliability and the lower cost shortly, and we'll talk about that productivity shortly as well. So particularly with things like App Canvas and the ability to deploy containers, you get to speed things up pretty significantly in terms of your development. And you know, we do certainly believe that it's cheaper. Obviously, that is not true for everybody in the room. Everybody's got their own use cases, but we've architected Cloud Run to just kind of give you the best of both worlds. And so I'm not going to dwell on the stats here, but the numbers kind of speak for themselves. But let's get into, so that's kind of the why Cloud Run. What's more interesting is talking about the what of Cloud Run. So there's two different flavors of Cloud Run. The first is your standard kind of platform as a service approach, which is, and Cloud Run is kind of almost sits in this weird in-between world of infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. But a pretty typical use case would be running it as either a public website or as an API type situation. And that's a very, very common use case. Whenever I build demos for customers, that's what I'm doing. That's how I'm using it. I'm a Python developer, by the way, so it's all done with Flask and Fast API, and I just stick it up on Cloud Run, and it just keeps on trucking. You can run private services on it as well. So because Cloud Run is baked into all of the authentication pieces, so you can choose whether it's your allowed anonymous invocation or you have to have authenticated invocation, which means somebody, you have to have an authenticated user that can call it. It also understands all of the stuff around VPCs and security perimeters and all that sort of stuff, so you can run private services on it as well. And it does talk about private HTTP and gRPC microservices there, but we also understand things like WebSockets and WebRTC and all the other good stuff that goes with that, HTTP3 and all those sort of protocols are all fully supported as well. And then finally, so that's the first flavor, which is more sort of the web flavor of Cloud Run. And that's kind of an always-on kind of concept, and we'll talk about that as well. I'll dive into that. And then the flip side, the second kind of flavor of Cloud Run that we have is what we call Cloud Run jobs, and that's more your batch processing, your job processing type functionality. And that's for things you can see there, more of event-driven architectures or scheduled jobs and that sort of thing. Excuse me. And you can, there's we've got 90 different triggers or something you can use for triggering your Cloud Run services. So you can use Cloud Scheduler, you can use PubSub, you can use or various other events. We have a product set called EventArc, which is an event-driven kind of processing workflow, and that has 90 different triggers. That's that 90 figure that I referenced, and then that just that can be used to drive Cloud Run as well. And so you can have got those two different flavors. So it's super simple. It can be fully automated. So for the GitHub folks in the audience, it can all be plumbed into things like GitHub Actions. So every time you can commit code, you can build and deploy a Cloud Run instance as well. And because it's very focused on kind of local development and building those containers and deploying them out, it's very developer friendly as well. So as I said, I'm a Python guy, so I'm sorry for the Node folks or all the Go folks or what have you in the audience. But I kind of evolved into a Python guy, so I can only talk about the Python frameworks. But we have a lovely module for Cloud Run development where essentially you just include it at the top of your Python script and add a decorator, and it essentially turns your local, when you're running Python locally, it basically turns it into like it emulates Cloud Run local. So, and you just run it just like you would say if you're developing with Flask, where you run a little local web server, but it looks to the inside of Python or your Python script, it looks like Cloud Run. So, which means for developing locally, it's super duper easy, right? Because you can just post to it and get data back out and emulate service accounts and do all the kind of local development things you want to do. And then when you're ready, you literally just push a button and bingo, it's in Cloud Run. So like as a developer-friendly thing, it's just a massive time saver. Well, I find it a massive time saver anyway. And so the point there at the top there is it can also run any container, right? So you're not restricted to, for people who are familiar with Google, when we still do, we have App Engine, which is a web app platform, but it can be quite restrictive in terms of what you can do. With Cloud Run, because you can run any container, you can do whatever you jolly well like, right? So you're not restricted to, say, the languages that a platform supports. If you want to write, a web app in Rust, go write that web app in Rust and deploy it to Cloud Run, right? So, but you get all the other good stuff that goes with it. So the other flavor of serverless that we have, which is kind of a cousin of Cloud Run, is Cloud Functions. So this is the true platform as a service where you just write some code and then we take care of all the runtimes for you, right? So that's the more traditional approach where we only support a subset of languages. I think we support about half a dozen, and then you just deploy and then you just walk away and you're done, right? That's Cloud Functions. We have a new version of Cloud Functions out, not surprisingly, called version 2, which is actually backed by Cloud Run. But you don't need to worry about the details. You still do exactly the same thing as you do with Cloud Functions, where you just write the code and off you go. It's much simpler and much easier to use. And you can see it's great for like little one-off, particularly those lightweight functions where you're doing some job processing, like somebody uploads a file to storage, that triggers an event that might, converts a Word document into a PDF for the sake of an example, right? That super little lightweight thing, and it just spins up, does its job, goes away again, and it's done. But it can scale to, whatever you want. So a quick story like along those lines, actually, just to quickly diverge into an anecdote. We used to do a lot of stuff with IoT on the edge and MQTT gateways and all sorts of things. And then what we actually discovered that not many people were using it, because what they were actually doing is just calling from their little IoT device, sending a pub sub notification, which is just a little HTTP request. And then that was calling a Cloud Function, which was putting the data into the database anyway. So people were kind of skipping the whole heaviness of MQTT and IoT and just pushing little pub sub messages in and just calling these super lightweight Cloud Functions to drop a record in a database table. And everybody was finding it far more convenient and easy and scalable, and that's what everybody ended up using without us kind of realizing. So which one should you use? Well, if you just want to deploy code and that's it, you don't care about anything else, then go use a Cloud Function. If you want more control over what you're deploying and how it's deployed and how it's run and all of the bells and whistles, then go use Cloud Run, right? That's really what it comes down to. But really the effort to deploy is basically the same, right? It's more the management, which is where the decision point comes in. So I talked about this already. So we have the services and the jobs. you can see some of the features there that I've talked about. And I'll come to some of these as well. So you can see out of the box SSL, automatic scaling. We talked about WebSockets and stuff I mentioned already. Traffic splitting we can do, and revision history. And then I talked about the jobs as well. And so the jobs is pretty easy. So some of the things you can do if you're using Cloud Run is I talked about the fact that it's containerized, but it doesn't use Docker files and things like that. That's because we use I was talking to somebody at lunch about this. We use a standard called build packs, but it's not really, it's a standard. It's a standard that we designed and we published and we use, and I don't think anybody else uses it, but we call it a standard because it's on GitHub. I don't know. So, and we created a website called buildpacks.io. So people can use it, but what buildpacks does is allows you to just deploy the code, deploy your code from source without having to go through the having to build a whole container to go with it. So you just push a button, say run my source, and we deploy it. So very, very easy. We also support rollouts and rollbacks. So you can do canary deployments and blue-green deployments and push the data around. And you can actually see here that you can even, if you want, you can directly address your blue or green deployments by URL if you need to, right? So you've got full control over how you route traffic between your instances. So a little bit drill down into the developer experience. A whole bunch of stuff was announced at Cloud Next, and I'm going to take you through some of it. The first is we've announced a whole bunch of out-of-the-box integrations for all of these databases, so you can plumb directly into your databases from Cloud Run without having to do the plumbing yourself. And I mentioned App Canvas, which is, and you can see that on the monitor in our booth. We designed the app for you using a large language model. We also now provide machine learning-based resource allocation reminders. So if we detect that your Cloud Run instance is constantly peaking at CPU or constantly underutilized, we'll say, you know what, you should lower your instance specs down, or you should increase your instance specs to help improve performance and things like that. We also have better support for things like containers, slow start, so you can turn on a CPU boost. So when the container starts, it'll actually boost the CPU performance for the first 30 seconds and then drop it back down again to increase that cold start if you decide to scale to 0. So, and lots of telemetry support as well. We also now, you can see we've got a lot more work going on with jobs, so we can allow jobs now to run for 24 hours if you wish. And you can also set a whole bunch of the CPU metrics as well. So you can decide whether, I'll come to it in a slide, but you can decide how you want Cloud Run to behave when there's no traffic. So by default, it will scale to 0. So if nobody's using it, you don't pay. But there is always a little startup cost, right, when it comes in cold. And for us, it's like 3 or 4 seconds it takes for the instance to spin up. But if you always want a warm or a hot instance, you can do that, and we'll charge you a little more for that, but you get to choose how you want it to behave, and that's done through the scaling and the other work. And one of my favorite new features coming out is the ability to do volume mounts. So you can now mount disk or NFS directly from inside the Cloud Run instance, which is very exciting. Some other more interesting things coming out. You can have your own custom authentication now as well. We can also automatically now bring security into your base images. So I talked about the fact that, on that yellow and blue slide, that you have to look after the container and we'll look after everything underneath it. And I said some of those boxes are changing color. This is one of those. We can actually monitor your container, the libraries and the OS sort of portion of your container for threats, and we'll patch the container and do the threat detection and patch the container on the fly for you. So the only part that you need to worry about is the app, and we'll actually worry about the infrastructure inside the container itself, which is pretty wild. And that's also the container threat detection there as well. So that's a pretty wild feature. The other feature that's already available around security is binary authorization. So this stops kind of supply chain attacks. So you'll actually validate and sign the container image prior to deployment. And then we'll check that container signature prior to it going into production. And if the signatures don't match, we won't allow it to deploy. Right? And you get to sit in the middle of that. And if you want, you can do the authorization there yourself. And the same is true for software delivery shield. So this is a little bit more going into depth on the ability to ensure that that threats, you can't get hacked, or not you can't get hacked, but taking care of those supply chain attacks and things like that through the software delivery shield. So lots and lots of security in terms of making sure that your app is secure and that people can't jump into it and serve malware and do all those bad actors. But what about people wanting to access the Cloud Run instance itself? So they also understand we can either put in front of a Cloud Armor, which is a cloud firewall, or we can put in identity-aware proxy. So this is how Google secures access over the internet. And this is basically gets rid of VPNs, and we basically know who you are through things like that. Not from a Google point of view knowing who you are, but from a corporate policy knowing who you are. And in terms of things like browser fingerprinting and mobile access device and IP addresses and things like that. And so you can say that only my corporate environment, people who belong to my corporate environment are able to access that. But it's done without VPNs and proxies. It kind of sits in front. And we use that at Google every day. A whole bunch of networking work. I'm just running a little short of time, so I'm just going to flash through this. I'm getting a look from down on the side there. And I just want to finish up with this slide on charging. So I mentioned different ways that you can get charged. So the first way is you can see if each time you've got your instance running there in black, each time a request comes in, you can see the blue, right? That's a request coming in. So by default, every time a request comes in and we process the request, these little green bars are chargeable chunks of time in terms of when the Cloud Run CPU is doing something. If you wish, you can set the Cloud Run to be always on, and we'll only charge you 25% of the cost of the CPU for running it when it's idle, because what we do is we keep the instance up, but we throttle the CPU down. If you need it to be always, so that's kind of a warm standby. You can also do a hot standby, where you turn CPU throttling off, and that means your CPU is always on and hot. So it's going to be instant all the time. So that's if you want instant thing. Of course, then the charging changes. So you get to choose how you want to structure your application based on essentially your appetite for billing, right? So that's just a very quick 22-minute tour of Cloud Run. We're out in the booth if you want to come and talk to us. I just want to give you three QR codes to finish off. If you want to learn about Cloud Run itself, on the left there, that'll just take you to our marketing site on Cloud Run with links to documentation and code samples and things. We've got the middle QR codes in our booth. We offer 300 free learning credits to go into our Cloud Skills Boost. Some of you may remember it as Quick Labs, and learn and do labs at no cost to learn how to use Cloud Run in a real cloud environment. So they're guided labs. And then if you're a startup, please scan the QR code on the right. If you're a startup that's been funded, we will give you up to $350,000 USD of cloud usage for free. So if you're a startup, scan that, come and talk to us. All right. Free money. Great. All right. And with that, I'm going to finish up, and thank you.
Thank you, Graeme.